Okay, well, it looks like we have all our panelists and most of the media folks we were expecting to arrive. So thanks again and welcome. We're glad you could join us for this important media briefing. My name, of course, is Laura Benson, and I am Beyond Coal campaigner with Dogwood Initiative. Dogwood is co-sponsoring this briefing today with Communities in Coal, Voters Taking Action on Climate Change, Save the Sailor She campaign, and No More Coal Exports. And I hope all of you can see my screen. Please type in the chat if you're having any troubles, and Brad Oldham of Popular Change can help you with technical difficulties. So representatives from each of our groups are with us on the webinar, and we will be able to take questions during the question and answer period. Participants are going to remain muted until that question and answer period, and I'll give you further instructions a little later. We're holding this briefing today to call on the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority to scrap its environmental impact assessment of the proposed coal handling terminal at Fraser Surrey Docks and start over with a comprehensive health and environmental impact assessment that considers the full scope of coal export expansion in our region, including Fraser Surrey Docks, Neptune terminals, Texada Island, and the associated transport routes. We are now 12 days away from the close of the public comment period for the Port's flawed EIA, and an ever-growing groundswell of public concern around the project from residents, municipal and regional governments, and our region's chief medical officers were what really forced the Port into calling for this assessment in the first place, but the results are woefully inadequate. As you know, our medical officers called for a full health impact assessment in order to assess the potential effects associated with the whole project, from transport by rail from the U.S. border all the way to Texada Island and into international waters for export. The Port's EIA has failed to live up to these requests, and Drs. Patricia Daly of Vancouver Coastal Health and Paul Van Vinder of Fraser Health have issued a detailed critique, finding that the EIA does not meet even the most basic requirements of a health impact assessment. While these opinions should be enough to convince anyone that the EIA is flawed and must be redone, the medical officers are not the only health and environmental experts who have found fault with the assessment. So today we will hear from 3 BC experts who have critiqued the environmental impact assessment. And in your press packets, you'll also find additional critiques from Dr. Christopher Carlson, Dr. Erica Frank, and Dr. Mark Jacquard. If you haven't already received a press packet, please contact us after the event to make sure we can get that to you. So of course I can't do the additional statements justice, but I do want to briefly note that Dr. Carlson has been able to join us here on the webinar at the last minute and will be available during the question and answer period. He's a specialist in the health effects of diesel and other particulate matter and has serious concerns about the assumptions used in the EIA to reach health impact findings. Given those concerns, he concludes that, quote, "It is difficult to defend the position that there will be no adverse health impacts resultant from the project." Dr. Erica Frank supports the finding of the medical officers and points out recent BC government recommendations that regulators and health professionals consider the health effects of climate change in their decision making. And considering the impact of new fossil fuel infrastructure on global climate change, Dr. Jacquard critiques the Port's outright refusal to consider climate change impacts in the EIA. But we're really here to hear from our speakers, so I want to move now to them. Each will have 3 minutes to summarize his critique of the Port's environmental impact assessment. After the presentations, I'll moderate a question and answer period. So we're going to move first to Tyee Bridge, who is Riverkeeper and Campaigns Director at the Fraser River Society. And I'm going to move now to unmute Tyee so he can make his presentation. Go ahead, Tyee. Are you there, Tyee? Okay, I think I'll move then to Dr. Tim Tuccaro, who's Professor of Health Sciences at SFU, and ask Tim to make his presentation. Go ahead, Tim. Oh dear. Tim, are you there? My apologies. Much as we tested this ahead of time, it looks like we're having some trouble patching in our panelists. So hopefully we can work with Tim and Tai, and I'm going to go to Andrei Sobolewski and ask Andrei if you can proceed now with your presentation.
Goodness, I hope I can be heard now.
Yes, thank you, Andrei.
Wonderful.
Go ahead, please.
Can I have the first slide, please? Next slide. I'm only concerned here about the environmental impacts of shipping the coal from Fraser Surrey Docks through the Straits of Georgia to Texada. I don't consider any other impacts for this presentation. If you notice the route that I have here, and bear in mind, if I can have the next slide, please. Yes, I looked at how the coal that would be shipped, the coal dust released from the barges will follow the currents. And these currents, you'll notice, could bring the coal dust on the Seychelles Peninsula, Leskiri, Hornby and Denman, possibly reach some of the marine parks that are present in the area, Sandy Island Marine Park and Jedediah Marine Park, or even hit the coast of Vancouver Island and reach some place like Fanny Bay that has been identified here. Next slide, please. So coal dust would float on the surface, be driven by currents, but eventually be deposited when it hits the shoreline. Depending on the tide, it'll be deposited anywhere between the high tide and low tide zone, so anywhere in the intertidal zone. And some of it could sink below the surface, and in particular worrisome, it may be deposited on the surface of kelp, to which it would adhere. And that's relevant because that's where herring spawn, and potential impact could be to affect herring reproduction. Now, how could it exert some impacts? One of the primary concerns is that the coal dust could be gathered by shellfish and other filter feeders, ingested that way, and contaminants could be transferred through the gut. Another possible consideration might be that fish that are grown in open net in aquaculture operations, there are a number on this Seychelles Peninsula, could consume from the coal dust. And a last possible source of impacts could be directly from metals that are leached out of the coal that is deposited, and the metals could be transferred through the food chain. Next slide, please. I'm not intending to conduct a thorough environmental assessment, but simply to indicate that there are reasons to be concerned. There are metals that are present in coal dust. I've highlighted two in particular because of their great toxicity, those being cadmium and mercury. These are analysis of metal content in coal dust in the last column on the right shows the average concentrations of these metals for Powder River coal, Powder River Basin coal, which is what would be shipped in this particular proposal. Next slide. So now, let's, for the sake of this particular, of my look at this, you can assume that some of the coal may go in the various places which were shown following the currents, and it's possible even that some of it would be deposited where oysters are grown in Fanny Bay. So there's a certain risk that exists that the oysters ingest the coal dust and take up cadmium and mercury. How much of a risk does that represent remains completely unquantified. It's never been looked at to speak of. I want to contrast this with another project that has had this same ecological effect being considered. So Compliance Coal has proposed to develop the Raven underground coal mine on Vancouver Island, and the water draining for that particular project would in fact be draining by Fanny Bay, and so part of their risk assessment was to consider the risks of metals being released by the project and its potential impact in Fanny Bay. In that particular impact assessment that was submitted to the BC Environmental Assessment Office, extensive studies were conducted to characterize metal release. Several strategies were developed to mitigate the risks, and several agencies and stakeholders were able to review these studies, critique them, and asked for modifications so that the full impacts could be, or the potential impacts could be mitigated to an acceptable level. I don't see any such studies that have been conducted by the applicant, and I asked the question, why is there a standard that was set for compliance coal and quite another is being set for Fraser Surrey Docks? Next slide, please. So, looking at from this one specific example, but I could give several others, I conclude that potential environmental impacts from shipping the coal through the Straits of Georgia have not been investigated. There's no idea of how much coal could be lost during shipment, where that coal dust could settle, how much metal leaching could occur from the coal dust, and where could be the impacts. Would it impact oyster beds? Would it impact spawning herrings? Would it impact even spotted prawns? Could you please allow me to read the slide? You're obscuring. Thank you. The Fraser Surrey Docks assessment entirely ignores the coast, and particularly worrisome, there's no expert review or public scrutiny of that particular assessment. So we are in the dark, and we are concerned. Last slide, please. So the solution to this particular problem is to broaden the terms of reference to include looking at potential impacts of coal dust in the areas that I've identified, have a comprehensive characterization of these potential impacts, identify measures to mitigate the risks, and if those risks are unacceptable, the project should not proceed. Finally, there should be extensive expert review by agencies and stakeholders, and this process should be open to public scrutiny. Thank you. Those are all the comments I have to make.
Thanks so much, Dr. Sobolewski. I'm going to move now to Tyee Bridge, and hope that we've worked out some of our technical difficulties. Tyee?
Can you hear me? This is Tyee talking.
Yes, thank you, Tyee. Go ahead, please.
Okay, hold on a second because I have to plug in here. Can you still hear me now?
Yes, go ahead. Oh, gosh. Oh, we seem to have lost Tyee again. Again, apologies, folks. Let's try to go to Dr. Takaro. Tim? It looks like you may be on mute on your side. Are you able to?
I'm unmuted now.
Okay, great.
Does that work?
Go ahead. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Tim Takaro. I'm a physician scientist and professor of health sciences at Simon Fraser University. I'm very interested in the health effects of climate change and occupational and environmental respiratory disease. I'm also a member of the International Joint Commission on Border Water Issues, Health Professional Advisory Board, and I'm talking to you as a resident of New Westminster, where I'm an official Fraser River watcher. And I'm also the father of 2 teenage children. We, as a society, have a serious addiction problem. It's an addiction to fossil fuels. We know it's harming us, and more importantly, future generations, but we can't stop. We have energy companies feeding us the cheap stuff while funding junk science to confuse the public about the risks of greenhouse gases and the unstable future climate linked to this habit. We have a federal government dependent upon the industry, too hell-bent on destroying Canada's preeminent public science capacity, as if what we don't know won't hurt us. Government scientists who have managed to hold on to their jobs are muzzled by their administrators. It's not surprising we have a largely complacent citizenry addicted to a product we know is hurting us, but unable or unwilling to wean ourselves off our addiction. That's exactly what the government and industry want. Someone has to stop us. There is not time here for me to address in any detail the economic value of protecting our health and ecosystems and the appropriate tax for polluting this commons, but this economic valuation is now widely discussed, and as almost everything is available online. But we are talking today about the most fossilized of the fossil fuels. It is 18th century fuel. Most people think we've stopped burning it here, but it is both deadly and an economic dead end. A recent analysis from several colleagues of mine at Boston University found that the 51 dirtiest U.S. coal-fired power plants produced in excess of 2,000 to 5,700 premature deaths from fine particulate emissions just in the year 2011. If you need to monetize this tragedy, it is equivalent to $23 to $47 billion using the EPA's valuation on human life. Cynically speaking, this dollar value exceeds the market value of the electricity generated. Another colleague, the late Paul Epstein from the Harvard School of Public Health, calculated that the life cycle effects of coal power and the industry's waste stream, including the large burden of illness from heart and lung diseases and cancer, are costing the U.S. taxpayers between $1.3 and $1.5 trillion a year when so-called externalities are included in the tab. U.S. coal burning is decreasing rapidly in the face of these realities. I should note that compared to China, where admittedly the economics are quite different, the U.S. power plants are relatively clean, not even in the same league with the emissions of China's dirtier, largely unregulated power stations. This harsh calculus just adds to the withering cynicism of fossil fuel dealers who tout the societal benefits of cheap, low-quality coal power, trotting out images of happy school children and pristine medical clinics powered with electricity from coal, as if there were no other methods of power generation. Next, perhaps you will see them use the reincarnation of Joe Camel cheekily piloting a coal ship through the Lion's Gate. Too dirty for North Americans, but hey, if you want it. Eventually, this cynicism will catch up with the fossil fuel industries and their government enablers, as it did with the opium industry, the tobacco industry, and the pesticide industry. But by then, it may be too late. Someone has to stop us. How big a climate change impact does this cheap Wyoming coal we're talking about have? Last year, 21 billion tons of coal were released from the Powder River Basin. Burning just this 1 year's worth will release 3.5 billion tons of CO2. This can be compared to the 2 billion tons of CO2 saved by EPA's newest vehicle emission standards over the lifetime of all cars made from 2017 to 2025. Someone has to stop us. Our children will witness accelerated trends of what we've already had glimpses of. Massive culling of sick and elderly from heat waves, increased superstorm activity, history-making forest fires, disappearing Arctic sea ice and subsistence culture, loss of BC's glaciers, and displacement of millions of the poorest people on Earth, fleeing drought, floods, and related conflict. This future will be the new normal. Someone has to stop us. We can start stepping away today from the brink with this decision on expanding the coal through Metro Vancouver's ports. Meaningful reductions in our global fossil fuel use will take time, but we must remind ourselves that while coal has been around for a long time, the oil and gas industry is just over 100 years old. Half of that industry was built since 1980. If we apply ourselves today and get control of our addiction starting today, we can hopefully kick the coal habit in less than the next 30 years. But to get there, we have to start. We have to start now down that road. Control of greenhouse gas emissions is the classic wicked problem. It seems to be beyond the ability of our current government structures to correct this. This means it is easy for political and business leaders to hide behind jurisdictional boundaries, as we see the Port of Metro Vancouver doing today, when they say that taking a stand on climate change is not, quote, in the scope of what the port does. This is terribly convenient for the port, but it is a fabricated impotence. The port is not shipping opium or even BC Bud. It chooses not to ship explosives, nuclear materials, or other hazardous products. To say the port can't control what it ships is ludicrous. Almost as ludicrous is to suggest that we should rely on the federal government to address Canada's greenhouse gas emissions. This is the same government that embarrasses us repeatedly on the international stage with regards to Canada's emissions, tossing aside agreements that most nations strive to meet, and showing only the addicts' desire to get more fossil fuels to market as soon as possible, as if there is a race to burn it up and to cash in before economic conditions or some stronger political force stops us. Only last month, at the World Climate and Coal Summit in Warsaw, ironically running in parallel with the UN Climate Conference, the Executive Secretary of the UN Climate Change Conference, Cristina Figueres, told participants that they must, quote, leave most existing reserves in the ground to avoid future climatic calamity. So I don't buy the argument that this threat is outside the jurisdiction of the impacts assessment we're discussing. Someone has to stop us, and who better than the aspiring greenest city in the world by 2020, this jewel that we call home. We crave environmental credibility. Our body politic runs on clean air, clean water, and the promise of a sustainable future. We are the logical leaders at this time in this place to begin the necessary retreat from coal. We must revoke the social license to ship coal from our ports. We are better than this, economically stronger than this, and environmentally smarter than this. Instead of growing this sector of our energy industry, we must shrink it and fully embrace the modern energy era with sustainable policies that account for the needs of future generations who will inherit our mess. We are the logical entity to say to the coal dealers that we have read the writing on the wall and we will no longer enable their trade in this commodity. It is harmful to our health and environment and increases the burden of future generations. We will not serve as the drug barons landing strip as in Honduras or Guatemala. We are going to transition away from fossil fuels. We will kick the habit, and in the spirit of public health, teach others how to do it too. Yes, maybe some other jurisdiction will ship this dangerous product, but you know what? It's getting harder and harder for the dealers to find a West Coast port willing to expand their coal trade. Our brothers and sisters on the West Coast are reading the writing on the wall too. We are not alone, and there is no better time than now to say, yes, we can lead this change and begin the slow process of weaning ourselves off our addiction. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Takaro. I just want to note that in the statement, in the press pack, Tim has also made some specific points about the health assessment in the environmental impact assessment and can take questions on that topic in particular. Okay, it looks like, unfortunately, Tai is having technical difficulties. So I think what I'll do now is open it up for some questions, and hopefully we can get Tai patched back in here. So I'm going to go ahead and moderate the question and answer period. You may address questions to any of the speakers or the co-sponsoring organizations, and you do so by indicating, using the raise hand icon that you should see in your control panel, and I will be able to call on you and unmute you when I indicate that it's your turn to ask a question. So, oh, it looks like Tai may be ready to go. And seeing no other immediate questions, I'm going to try to go to Tai now. Tai, are you there? Looks like you may be muted on your end, Tai.
Hello, can you hear me?
There we go. So
wow, what a saga. Thanks, everybody, for hanging out for that.
Glad to hear your voice.
Yes, okay. Glad to be heard. Sorry, I'll try to make this snappy here for delaying for so long. So this is Tai Bridge. I'm campaign director for Fraser Riverkeeper. Just going to mention a couple of points here. I think that much of the good stuff has been touched on already, but I'll reiterate a couple of things. I really want to reflect again what I believe was Andre said at the beginning, which is that the EIA doesn't really function as we would understand an EIA to do by giving us estimates of how much coal dust is going to be produced by this facility and the transport to and from this facility, nor does it talk about impacts, local impacts for that dust. Really, the EIA seems to take the position that there really will be no dust from this facility, and that's a position that we would say is optimistic to say the least. I was speaking to Michael Reardon. He's a former MIT physicist who reviewed the Cherry Point coal proposal just south of us here, and it was a really good discussion. And when we talked about what's going on up here, Michael said, you know, the math isn't difficult here, people. It's look at how much is they're talking about shipping, and think about what kind of rates they're probably going to have for retention. So I estimated a 1 part of 10,000 escapement of, say, fugitive coal dust or particulate matter or pieces of coal that might be spilled. And if you think about that, for 1 part in 10,000, if they lose only 1 part in 10,000, as it states in our comments, that's 400,000 kilograms of toxic coal dust per year entering the water and our air. And as Andre has already pointed out, that comes laden with heavy metals and as well polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which is fancy language for what they call PAHs, which is something that is known to be a carcinogen in the human environment, but also in the aquatic environment. So that's kind of one of the first platforms I would say that to critique this report is, why has this report gone under the assumption that simply because they're spraying these coal trains with surfactants, which is a typical industry solution, or quote-unquote solution for preventing fugitive coal dust, which we all know doesn't work. I think many of us saw that that Delta coal train video that was going around a while ago, and even Burlington Northern Santa Fe, the corporation that is charged with distributing much of this coal that we're talking about here, has since pulled this information from their website, but we still have it. They did a report that showed that when coal trains pass to their destinations, they can lose up to 3% of their payload per car. Lesser than 3%, it can be 500 pounds per car. Now, if these cars are parked on spur tracks right next to the Fraser River for indefinite periods, probably most of the year, that presents a real problem. And of course, as Andre has pointed out, barging it has the exact same issue. And I would argue that as you're dumping the coal from the rail cars into the barges, that's a very messy process. What the EIA contemplates for dealing with that, again, is a combination of surfactants and misting to control that. Well, I personally don't believe that that's going to result in a 0 parts escapement. I think the port and the Fraser Surrey Docks would be lucky indeed if they could achieve a 1 part in 10,000 escapement. And for now, we're only talking about if you'll pardon the word, 4 million tons of coal. They would like, I believe, in future to get up to 8 million tons. So we're talking for the public here and for our waters and the air between 400,000 to 800,000 kilograms of toxic coal dust going into our environment. So just 2 other quick points on this is that what I would expect from an environmental impact assessment would be an understanding of where you're doing your work. And I don't see that in this document. What I don't see at all, they do mention that the Fraser River is habitat to, I think they say 43 varieties of fish, which indeed it is. Those include, of course, 5 species of salmon. And to its credit, the report does note that one of those species is the endangered white sturgeon. It doesn't say anything, however, about the fact that right offshore of where this facility is intended to be is critical rearing habitat for juvenile white endangered sturgeon. That species is COSUIC listed, which is the Committee on the Status of Endangered Species in Canada. It's a species that has been a special concern for a long time, and in the last 10 years alone, that species here in the Lower Fraser has declined by 25%. Now that's documented. So why is this report not talking about potential impacts of that? Because that habitat stretches all the way from Barnston Island to the tip of Annacis Island. And any fugitive coal that goes off of there and enters into the water is coming into that habitat. So I'd like to see that dealt with in a far more rigorous manner than we've seen to date. Additionally, these impacts, as I think have already been touched on a little bit, what goes into the Fraser, it's noted sort of grudgingly in the report that if anything goes in the river, well, it's okay because there's so much water and it flows so fast. Well, that may be the case, but they've not really proven that. And if indeed it is all flushed out, that's still ending up in the estuary, and it's still ending up in the Strait of Georgia. So what happens when you put 400,000 kilograms per year of this toxic coal dust into the system? We already know that our orca are terribly toxic. They're mostly from PCBs, but our species like herring, salmon, and orca are sensitive to environmental pollutants. If you do consult our comment letter, you'll see some of the citations on that. And herring in particular are a backbone of they're a keystone species here for so much of our marine ecosystems, and they're very vulnerable to these kinds of impacts from PAHs specifically. The reason that we're pulling out, these pilings that are covered in creosote all over the place now in BC, in Washington State, up in Alaska, we're removing these pilings because they're sources of PAHs. And in this respect, with transporting coal, we're essentially going backwards 20 years, dumping 400,000 kilograms of it into our waterways and our air every year. That's a few of our concerns. There are more, and certainly if there's anyone who has questions about our sources for this data, we can certainly pass it on. But really, it's about this report doesn't tell us how much coal is going to escape, and it doesn't really in any way contemplate or discuss the effects on our marine habitat. And that's probably the substance of what we have to say on it.
Okay, thanks so much, Chai. We are now going to move to questions. So again, please use the hand raising tool. I think I did notice one hand go up, and that before Thais spoke. So I'm going to go first to Emily Jackson. So please do use that hand raising tool if you do want to ask a question. So Emily, I'm going to unmute you now, and the floor is yours.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Awesome. I am just wondering, the port CEO recently said that they've completed a health assessment, and you guys just mostly touched on environmental issues, but they say their expert, one of the leading toxicology guys, said there shouldn't be any health impacts to humans along the rail car. What do you make of his claims, and do you have alternative ones, or?
Thanks, Emily. I'm actually going to ask Dr. Chris Carlston, who has joined us on the line and has critiqued the environmental impact assessment from the perspective of particulate matter and diesel exhaust. And then I think Dr. Chikaro might also have something to say about that. But Dr. Carlston, I'm going to unmute you if you can take that question.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Go ahead.
Great. I am working in the hospital currently, so occasionally there is an overhead announcement. I hope that doesn't happen. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Just briefly, I'm an associate professor at UBC. I'm a physician, but I am also a researcher. In fact, the majority of my job is specifically devoted to a research program investigating the health effects of diesel exhaust. My lab is actually the only one in Canada that does specifically investigate the health effects of diesel exhaust in humans, and it's one of just a few in the world, so I do feel like I have some authority to make some comments. The letter, first of all, as far as climate change, I would defer to Dr. Chikaro, but I do agree with his concerns. I'm going to focus on particulate matter, health effects, and the details of what I'm going to summarize briefly are available for anyone to read as a public document that I provided. I would just say in summary of that the EIA as it pertains to health effects is quite superficial. This is not only in regards to the toxicologist you mentioned, who does not personally, I think, figure prominently into the analysis. So I'm not going to implicate him per se, but as a whole, the document is superficial. It does not use best practices for health effects analysis. There are a number of specific points I'd make therein. One is that the understanding of sensitive populations is poorly put forth in that document. I don't think the document shows a great understanding of sensitive populations and how they operate in the real world. There are some arbitrary constructs about the fence line, which I think show a naivete to the transport of air pollution in the real world. There's a relatively poor understanding of modeling of air pollution. There are further superficialities in terms of understanding heterogeneity in air pollution and how it acts, and so they operate in the world of averages that is not appropriate to this context, where we're really trying to take a more advanced approach to these kinds of analyses, where we use best practices to to mitigate potential effects rather than sort of look at averages and hope for the best, which is how I would paraphrase their approach. The EIA trivializes the industrial worker. It actually makes the point itself that industrial workers are going to be subject to elevated levels of particulate matter, but implies to me a resignment of those individuals to a category, I guess, that doesn't merit specific protection, which I think is insulting to the workers. But certainly those outside of the workplace, because of sensitive populations, et cetera, are also going to be vulnerable. So, and finally, it hides behind the lack of Metro Van's ambient air quality objectives in the fact that they don't have Metro Vancouver currently a diesel particulate matter objective, but rather than hiding behind that lack of AAQO, it's really incumbent upon us in this setting to do the best regardless of the lack of that standard in Metro Van. So it's a rather superficial document. It's disappointing, and I'm very hopeful, both as a scientist, a physician, and a citizen, that that a better assessment will be put forth.
Thank you so much, Dr. Carlston. I do want to go give Dr. Takara a chance to respond to that question as well.
Can you hear me now?
Tim, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. So I'll just respond to one specific aspect of the toxicologist's assessment. They refer to a safety factor that is used in their assessment. What they don't say, what they say, here I'll quote, is health agencies typically apply a tenfold uncertainty factor to account for interspecies variability. This factor is applied to account for potential sensitive subpopulations such as children and elderly. I don't think they mean to be saying that there are interspecies variabilities between children and elderly. I hope they have that part correct. But the point I'm trying to make is, actually, when we do these risk assessments, we do apply such safety factors, but it is 10 for each of them. In other words, there's a factor of 10 for the interspecies variability. There is another factor of 10 for the vulnerable populations, children and elderly. And then I would suggest that there is a third factor of 10 that should be applied for impacts on people with chronic disease, such as lung disease and heart disease. So if you apply those three safety factors, that would be much more appropriate. And then you are getting into the range, which, as they point out in the in the EIA, that the nearest residential receptor gets an exposure of 1.4 micrograms per meter cubed. That does fall within the range of concern, and that is completely missed by the EIA in its current form because of this incorrect application of the safety factor.
Thanks so much, Tim. At this point, I don't see any other hands up. If there are questions, please do use that hand-raising tool, and I will get to your question. We do have some time left for questions and answers, so please do take the opportunity, since we have our experts here on the line. And I am going to be taking questions only from members of the media at this point. No further questions? We can move to wrap up the session. And of course, I've sent you all a note with some information about how to obtain a copy of the press packet that has all of the comment letters from the experts that you've heard from today. We will also be posting these letters publicly at realporthearings.org. So it looks like Tai has a question. I'll just give you a quick minute. Tai, did you?
Hi. It's, of course, for me, it's not a question. I did want to just add one thing. Is that appropriate at this moment?
Sure. The
last thing that I didn't get to in my flurry of things I was talking about there is wastewater, and I do think that it's something that needs to be talked about and flagged. This operation intends to suppress coal using, misting, and equipment will be all washed down. This EIA doesn't tell us how that water is going to be treated. It has, in fact, said that it will be treated in or dealt with in one of three ways. It's either going to go right into the Metro Vancouver sewer system after treatment, which we are not told how much particulates that's going to remove or to what level, or directly into the Fraser. That's a lot of particulate matter going directly into our water supply that needs to be far more stringently, and rigorously dealt with and talked about. It's completely up in the air at this point as to what that means and what amounts and volumes of wastewater we're talking about, which I personally have no knowledge of these operations on the ground, but I would assume that those numbers and those volumes are significant, to say the least.
Thanks, Tai. It looks like perhaps Dr. Sobolewski wanted to weigh in as well. Andre, did you have maybe?
Hi, I'm here. I wanted to make a more general comment. In my participation in several impacts assessment, I've seen the to and fro of the proponent putting forward a plan, the plan being reviewed by agency experts or stakeholders. It is sent back to the proponent, they modify in response, it is resubmitted, the draft EA is resubmitted back and forth a number of times like this. The points that are raised here are all fairly valid points, and all of these are issues that would have been flagged in a proper review of an impact assessment had it been submitted for review to official agencies or stakeholders. Because of the absence of this review process, we're left with a document that is incomplete, inadequate, and that any expert will immediately recognize some of the flaws associated with each of these issues, as has been done in this particular presentation. So the main problem coming out of this is the lack of proper scrutiny to this impact assessment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Andre. It looks like there were a couple of questions submitted through the chat, and I do see that Kevin Roshbrook has his hand up, but I want to go first to Brad Oldham, who's doing some technical assistance here. He's indicated there are a couple questions that came in writing. Brad, could you pose those questions for us? Are you there, Brad? How about that? Brad?
How about you unmute me? That works better.
There.
I had a question there was a question in with regard to Jeff Scott's comment that it was inappropriate to comment because the workers are not affected by the coal dust, and sort of wondering about the workers face much less risk by hundreds of percent than workers at mines, and just sort of comment the difference between workers at the coal yards. I'm going to start taking that as the mine workers versus the workers in the yards and people exposures, and some of the comments around that.
Okay, and it looks like maybe Kevin wanted to address that question. Okay, Kevin, go ahead.
No, sorry, that wasn't my point at all, so I'll step out for now.
Okay. Let's see. I think I'll go to Dr. Takaro then. Tim,
Yep.
Did you want to field that question?
Sure. I mean, there's no doubt that underground mining of coal is the highest exposure to coal dust, and those miners can get very sick even at levels that are legal, and that's well documented by the National Institutes of Occupational Safety and Health in the U.S. But that does not mean that there is no risk at the lower doses, and in fact, for particulate matter in general, that is the small particles that we breathe into our lungs, there does not appear to be a threshold effect. In other words, there's not a safe level. We know that even ambient air pollution in Vancouver has negative health effects, and we are in one of the cleanest cities in the world. So to argue that, well, it's cleaner than a coal mine is not the point. These workers are still exposed at a higher level than the general populace, and the general populace is having health effects from the lower levels. So, of course, these workers are likely to have health effects as well from higher levels, depending on how well they are protected.
Okay, thanks so much. Okay, I'm quickly going to go to Kevin, and then we will wrap up because I'm cognizant of the time that we've allowed. Go ahead, Kevin.
Hi, I just wanted to say quickly in response to Tai's comments about wastewater that the City of Surrey itself has also been highly critical of the EIA's failure to address those issues, and we've posted their response to the EIA up on the Real Port Hearings website, and we've highlighted the sections that refer to stormwater management and wastewater. That's it.
Okay, thanks so much. We are going to go to Paula Williams now from Communities in Coal, and she's going to wrap up our session for today. And of course, you, if there are any follow-up questions, feel free to contact any of us. And again, this will be a recording of the session will be posted at realporthearings.org as well. So I'm going to go to Paula. Hi, Paula, are you there?
I'm here. Hello, everyone.
Okay,
my name is Paula, and I'm the. You can hear me?
Go ahead.
Can you hear me, Laura?
Yeah,
okay,
go
great.
ahead.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Paula, and I'm the co-founder of a group called Communities in Coal. We represent an ever-growing movement of BC residents who are opposed to the Fraser Surrey Docks proposal. One of the messages we wanted to convey here today is that as these critiques from recognized experts show, in addition to Dr. Paul Van Binder and Dr. Patricia Daly's statements, the environmental impact assessment is fatally flawed. And due to these substantial deficiencies, we have to ask ourselves, why is Port Metro Vancouver reluctant in asking for a comprehensive health impact assessment? The Port has stated that they will consider all input before an announcement is made, and so we need to remind them that municipalities representing over 1 million people are either opposed to this or want at minimum a comprehensive health impact assessment. This opposition from intelligent and reasonable people represents input which should not be ignored. If this was a marketing firm and there was that much negative feedback on a product, they would pull the plug or revise it. In this case, at minimum, they must consider seriously conducting a comprehensive health impact assessment by an independent third party. What this comes down to really is a tale of two wills. On one hand, you have a company who wants to see their proposal approved so they can proceed to ship U.S. thermal coal to generate profits for their facility and to create at most 25 jobs. On the other hand, you have municipalities representing over 1 million people, as I said, who want the port to be accountable to and to do proper due diligence, as it is these people who are taking on all the risk for this proposal and will see little to no benefit. In our opinion, it would be irresponsible for the port to proceed and approve this proposal. Let us not forget that it wasn't too long ago that we believed that smoking was not harmful to our health, and tobacco companies did everything in their power to convince the public that these things were just fine. It took a whistleblower and a shift in thinking for people to come on board with the new truth. Reality is a state of things as they actually exist rather than as they may appear or might be imagined. Port Metro wants us to imagine that there is no risk with this proposal, as Robin Sylvester has recently stated. As their television ads show, they want us to believe that they appear to have our concerns and interests in mind. However, the port's support of the environmental impact assessment, which has left out most of the affected areas, tells me our interests and concerns have not been considered, and it also leads me to conclude that the state of reality is still an imaginary one. I'm going to leave you with two thoughts today. Firstly, we will continue to encourage people to flood the port with comments on the environmental impact assessment and to use the site realporthearings.org to communicate a transparent message. We ask you to share this message. Secondly, we realize the port may not make the right decision, and so I am asking this question. Who in the provincial government will have the moral fortitude to do what is right for the people and not be afraid to stand up and be the voice to lead us through this? We are looking to our provincial government to rise above and not be afraid. It is fear which is going to hold us back. True leadership will take us in a new direction and not at the expense of the health and well-being of hundreds of thousands of people. Change is inevitable and it is part of progress. We need to realize that perhaps the way the port operates is a way of the past. Citizens are too smart for that, and they want to take ownership over their health and their right to clean air, land, and water. Just this past Monday night, the City of North Vancouver passed a motion unanimously asking the port for their own health impact assessment for Neptune terminals. This is yet another example of a shift in beliefs which is happening, and all residents know they deserve a fair process. The old way is ending, and a new direction is needed in order to balance business with people. We are asking the provincial government to step in and to respect our concerns and to help us in getting a comprehensive health and environmental impact assessment and full public hearings for all communities. Nothing more and nothing less. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Paula. And thanks for everyone for joining us today. Thanks to our panelists. Thanks to the co-sponsors. And thanks to the participants for hanging in there, even given a few technical difficulties. And again, please do feel free to follow up with any of us if you have further questions. I think we're going to officially sign off now. And again, thanks for joining us.